The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and the number on my screen was my granddaughter's. That alone told me something was wrong. Lily, my daughter's girl, 10 years old, sharp as a tack and tough as nails, never called me that late. She texted me memes about dogs. She sent voice messages where she'd forget what she was saying halfway through and just start laughing. She did not call at 11:47 p.m. on a school night. I picked up before the second ring. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Grandpa, they're gone." I sat up in bed. "What do you mean gone, sweetheart?" "They left. Mom and Derek and Cody. They left this morning and they didn't take me." I didn't say anything for a second. I needed to make sure I'd heard her right. "They left for the trip?" "Yeah, and you're home alone." "Yeah, since this morning." A pause. Then quietly, "Since 6:30. It was almost midnight." My 10-year-old granddaughter had been alone in that house for over 17 hours. I already had my feet on the floor. Let me back up, because if I just tell you what happened next, you're going to think I'm the kind of man who acts without thinking. I'm not. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a project manager for a civil engineering firm. I believe in having all the information before you make a move. So let me give you the full picture, because you need it. My daughter is named Stephanie. She's 36, and she is the best thing I ever had a hand in making. Smart, warm, stubborn in the best possible way. Her mother passed 8 years ago, breast cancer, 2 years from diagnosis to the end, and after that it was just me and Stephanie and her brother Kevin, who lives out in Phoenix now with his own family. Stephanie married Derek 4 years ago. I tried. I genuinely tried to like the man. He's 42, works in commercial real estate, has the handshake of someone who learned from a YouTube video on how to seem confident. He's not a bad person in the way that makes the news. He's bad in the quieter way, the kind of man who's always keeping score and always making sure the score favors him. Derek had a son from his first marriage. Cody, 12 years old now, big for his age, plays travel soccer. I actually like Cody fine. He's not the problem. The problem is how Derek treats the two kids differently, and the way my daughter has somehow convinced herself she doesn't see it. Stephanie has Lily from her relationship before Derek. Lily's biological father has been out of the picture since before Lily could walk, his choice entirely. So when Stephanie and Derek married, the family was supposed to blend. That was the word everyone used. Blend. Like they were a smoothie. What it looked like in practice was Cody's travel soccer fees paid without discussion, while Lily's art class had to be budgeted for. It was Derek remembering Cody's dentist appointment and forgetting Lily's. It was small things, each one deniable on its own. I mentioned it to Stephanie twice. Both times, she said I was reading too much into it, that Derek loved Lily, that things were fine. I didn't push it. She's a grown woman and Lily seemed okay. Happy at school, happy when she came to my place on weekends. We'd bake things and watch old movies, and she'd tell me about her friends and what she was drawing. She's been taking art seriously since she was about 7. That kid can look at something and put it on paper in a way that makes you stop and just stare. So that was the situation going into this spring. Derek had been planning what he called a big family trip since January. He'd been talking about it at every dinner I had with them. A cruise out of Miami, 7 nights, Caribbean, one of those enormous ships with the water slides and the shows and the restaurants that cost extra, even though you've already paid a fortune to get on the boat. He showed me the brochure on his phone once. $14,000 for the 4 of them, he said. He seemed proud of the number. I didn't think much of it. Seemed like a lot of money for a floating mall, but that's just me. About 3 weeks before the trip, I was over at their house for Sunday dinner, and Lily was quieter than usual. After we ate, while Derek and Stephanie were cleaning up, Lily came and sat next to me on the couch. She had her sketchbook in her lap, and she was drawing, but not really drawing, if you know what I mean. Just moving the pencil around. I asked her what was wrong. She looked at the kitchen doorway, then at me, and said, "Grandpa, am I going on the trip?" I said of course she was. Why would she ask that? She shrugged. I heard them talking. Mom said something about just the 3 of us, and Derek said something about it being easier. I told her she must have misheard. I went home that night and called Stephanie and asked her directly, "Is Lily going on the cruise?" Stephanie said, "Dad, I can't get into this right now," which it was not a yes. I pushed. I said I needed to hear her say it. She said, "Derek has a lot going on. Cody has a tournament right after we get back, and he needs this trip to decompress. It's complicated." I said, "Stephanie, is your daughter going on the family vacation?" Long pause. "We're going to do something special with her separately, after." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Who is staying with her while you're gone? She's old enough to. She is 10 years old, Dad. She's very mature." I said some things after that which I'm not proud of in terms of tone, but I stand behind the content. I told Stephanie that leaving a 10-year-old alone for a week was not a parenting choice, it was negligence. I told her I didn't care what Derek thought was easier. I told her this was the kind of thing that leaves a mark on a child that doesn't come out in the wash. She told me I was overreacting and that she'd figure it out and she'd call me back. She did not call me back. I called her twice over the next 2 weeks. Both times she said everything was handled and changed the subject. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. I told myself she wouldn't actually do it. That when it came down to it, my daughter would not leave her little girl home alone while she sailed around the Caribbean. Then my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. After I got off the call with Lily, I had maybe 90 seconds where I just stood in my kitchen in my socks and t-shirt and breathed. Then I called her back and told her to unlock the front door and turn on the porch light, and that I'd be there in 40 minutes. It's actually a 50-minute drive from my house to theirs, but I made it in 38. She was sitting on the front steps when I pulled up, wrapped in a blanket she'd taken off the couch, her sketchbook in her lap. She'd drawn the whole front yard in the dark, apparently. When she saw my headlights, she stood up, and I hadn't even gotten out of the car before she started crying. The quiet kind, not dramatic, just like she'd been holding it for a long time and now she could finally put it down. I held on to her for a while on those steps. Then I went inside. I don't know exactly what I expected to find, but I think part of me had hoped there was some version of this, where the story I had in my head was worse than reality, where there was a neighbor who'd been checking in, or a family friend staying in the guest room, or something that would let me walk back from the cliff I was already standing at the edge of. There was no neighbor. There was no family friend. There was a note on the kitchen counter in Derek's handwriting that said, "Emergency numbers on fridge. Be good. Back Sunday." There was half a box of cereal, a jar of peanut butter, some bread that was getting close to the end of its life, and 3 cans of soup on the counter. In the fridge there was lunch meat, some leftover pasta, a couple of yogurts. A 10-year-old girl, alone for a week, with soup and peanut butter and a sticky note. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. Lily came and stood in the doorway. She said, "I've been okay, Grandpa. I watched a lot of TV. She was trying to make me feel better. She was 10 years old, and she was trying to make me feel better." I turned around and told her to go pack a bag, whatever she needed for a week, plus her sketchbooks and her good-colored pencils. I told her she was coming to stay with me. She said, "Are Mom and Derek going to be mad?" I said, "I'll handle that." While she packed, I walked back out to my car and sat in the driver's seat and called my son-in-law. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was after midnight. I left a message anyway. I kept my voice steady. I said, "Derek, this is Lily's grandfather. I'm at your house right now. I've picked up Lily and she'll be staying with me until you return. I want you to call me when you get this." Then I hung up and immediately called Stephanie, also voicemail. I said, "Stephanie, I need you to call me as soon as you hear this. I'm not angry, I just need to talk to you. Lily is with me. She's safe." Both of those statements were true. The second one more than the first. I drove home with Lily in the passenger seat. She fell asleep about 20 minutes into the ride, head against the window, blanket pulled up to her chin. I drove the rest of the way with the radio off. I got her settled in the guest room. She'd stayed there enough times that she had a few things already there. A stuffed animal she'd left on a previous visit, some books on the nightstand. She was asleep again within 5 minutes of getting into bed. I sat at my kitchen table until about 2 in the morning. Then I did something I'd been thinking about for the past 3 weeks, ever since that phone call with Stephanie, where she'd refused to answer me directly. I called my attorney. Well, I sent an email, since it was 2 in the morning. But I'd already spoken to her twice in the past 3 weeks. A family law attorney here in Charlotte, woman I'd been referred to by a friend when he went through his divorce 5 years ago. Sharp, no nonsense, straight with me about what the law actually said versus what I wanted it to say. Her name is irrelevant for this story, but I'll tell you she's the kind of lawyer who responds to your 2 a.m. emails before 8 a.m., which tells you everything you need to know. We'd already discussed the situation. I'd already asked her, hypothetically, what my options were if my grandchild was being left alone while her mother and stepfather traveled. She'd walked me through it. She'd told me what documentation would matter, what the threshold for Child Protective Services involvement looked like, and what my rights as a grandparent were in North Carolina. I'd taken notes. I'd kept them. I also, over the past 3 weeks, had written down every conversation I'd had with Stephanie about this. Dates, times, approximate words. I had the 2 voicemails I'd left. I had a text from Stephanie that said, in writing, "Dad, she's fine. This is handled," which told me nothing was actually handled. My attorney had told me that documentation was everything. That if this ever needed to go in front of anyone official, the story I could tell with paper would matter more than the story I could tell with feelings. So I had paper. Wednesday morning, Lily woke up and ate scrambled eggs and seemed, genuinely, to just be relieved to be somewhere that wasn't an empty house. We went to the craft store because she'd run out of a particular kind of charcoal pencil. We had lunch at a diner we like. She drew a portrait of the waitress, who was so delighted that she put it up on the little corkboard by the cash register. I was watching my granddaughter be a normal 10-year-old, and I was furious in a very quiet, very specific way. Derek called me at 2:17 p.m. He did not call to apologize. He called to explain, which I've learned is a completely different thing. He said that Lily was extremely independent and very capable. He said they'd had a neighbor checking on her. When I asked which neighbor, he said the Pattersons, and I happened to know the Pattersons had moved to Atlanta 8 months ago. He said the trip had been planned around Cody's needs, and it was just the timing. He said Stephanie had wanted to bring Lily, but it wasn't feasible logistically. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I said, "Derek, I need you to understand something. Lily is 10. Leaving her alone for a week is not a parenting style. It's neglect. And I have documentation of this situation that I will use if I need to." He got quiet. I said, "I'm not looking to make this worse than it needs to be. But when you get home Sunday, the 3 of us, you, me, and Stephanie, are going to sit down and have a very specific conversation about how things are going to be different." He said, "You can't just threaten us." I said, "I'm not threatening. I'm telling you what's going to happen." And I hung up. Stephanie called 40 minutes later. She was crying. She said she knew it was wrong, that she'd had a bad feeling the whole time, that she'd tried to bring it up with Derek and he'd said Lily would be fine, and she'd let herself believe it because she wanted the trip to be. She stopped herself. I said, "Because you wanted the trip." She didn't answer. I said, "Stephanie, I love you more than I can say, you know that. But what you did to your daughter is something I can just let go. You left her alone." She called me crying at midnight. She'd been sitting on the front steps in the dark. She was quiet for a long time. I said, "When you get home, we're going to figure out how to fix this. Not just this trip. The pattern. Because this didn't come out of nowhere." More silence. Then, "I know." That was all she said. But it was the first honest thing she'd said to me in 3 weeks, so I held on to it. The rest of the week, Lily and I did what we always do. We went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning. She taught me how to draw a hand, which is apparently one of the hardest things to draw, and I was terrible at it, and she was patient and encouraging in the way that 10-year-olds somehow manage to be when they know something you don't. We made chili on Friday night. We watched 2 movies, her pick, then my pick. She picked something animated. I picked something from 1987 with a car chase that she said was honestly kind of awesome. I kept thinking, this kid is fine. This kid is resilient and funny and talented. And the fact that she's fine right now, today, sitting next to me eating popcorn, doesn't mean what happened to her was okay. Kids are fine right up until they aren't. And the things that happen to them in the quiet years leave marks that don't show up until later. I thought about that a lot. Sunday afternoon, Derek and Stephanie came home. They came to my house. I'd told them to come here rather than going back to an empty house and pretending everything was normal. I thought it was important that we have this conversation on neutral ground, or at least ground where I had the home advantage. Lily was in the backyard with her sketchbook when they arrived. I met them at the door. Stephanie looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Derek looked like a man preparing to negotiate. I showed them into the living room, and I did not offer coffee, which, if you know anything about Southern hospitality, tells you something. I sat across from them and I put a folder on the coffee table. Derek looked at it. He said, "What's that?" I said, "That's documentation. Our phone conversations, my text messages with Stephanie, the note you left on the counter, I photographed it. A record of the conversations I had with my attorney." Stephanie's eyes went to the folder, then to me. She said, "Dad," I said, "I'm not here to blow up your family. I want to be very clear about that. But I need you both to understand that what happened this week is not going to happen again, and I need more than your word on that. Derek started to say something, and I kept going. I said, Lily is Stephanie's daughter. That means she is your stepdaughter, Derek. Not a guest in the house. Not a logistical complication. Your daughter. And if there is ever again a situation where she is treated differently than Cody, in a way that is documented, in a way that I can show to a family court judge, I will do exactly that. I'll show it. The room was quiet enough that I could hear Lily humming something to herself in the backyard. Derek said, You're seriously threatening to take our kids? I said, I'm telling you what the law allows me to do. And I'm telling you I have 3 weeks of documentation that shows a pattern of differential treatment and a week of documented abandonment of a minor child. What you do with that information is up to you. Stephanie said quietly. Derek. Stop. He stopped. She said, Dad's right. Derek turned to look at her. She didn't look back at him. She kept her eyes on me and she said, I let this happen. I knew it wasn't right and I let him talk me out of it, and I'm not going to do that again. Then she finally looked at Derek. I need you to hear that. The thing about Derek is that he's smart enough to know when a room has turned. He sat back. Some of the negotiating posture went out of his shoulders. He said, I hear it. I don't know what that's worth. I know what people say in a room when they're caught, and I know that saying and doing are different things. But Stephanie looked different to me sitting there than she had in a long time. Like something had come back into focus for her. I said, I'm going to stay involved, more than I have been. I'm going to be at that house more, and I'm going to make sure Lily knows she can call me any time, for any reason. And if something shifts, I touched the folder, I still have this. Derek nodded. He looked like a man who had just realized that the trip he thought was over wasn't entirely over yet. We called Lily in from the backyard. She came through the back door with grass on her shoes and her sketchbook under her arm, and when she saw her mom, she stopped in the doorway for a second. Stephanie got up and crossed the room and held onto her, and I watched my daughter press her face into her daughter's hair and stay there for a long time. Lily met my eyes over her mother's shoulder. She had a look on her face that I can't quite explain. 10 years old and somehow managing to look both tired and okay at the same time, the way kids do when they've been through something and they're still standing. I gave her a nod. She gave me one back. That was 3 months ago. I've been at their house for dinner twice a month since then. Lily's art class was re-enrolled, and her spot in the summer program at the Community Arts Center, the one Derek had said was probably not worth the cost, got paid for in full. I won't tell you everything is perfect. I don't know what goes on in that house when I'm not there, and I'm not naive enough to think one hard conversation permanently changed who Derek is. But Stephanie is different, more present, less willing to let things slide. I can see her paying attention in a way she wasn't before. Last week, Lily sent me a photo of a drawing she'd done, a still life of my kitchen table, the one we'd eaten breakfast at every morning she was with me. The cereal box, the salt shaker, the little cactus I keep by the window. She'd gotten every detail right down to the crack in the ceramic of the cactus pot. Under the photo, she sent a text that just said, I remembered everything, Grandpa. I know she did. That's the part that matters, and it's the part that's going to stay with me a lot longer than any of the rest of it. I keep the folder, though, right where I can find it.